Hello, everyone. Once again, this is Dare to Speak. I wanted to talk about a particular subject into the whole street gang history and ideas related to it. And I did do a couple of successful videos in order to educate the younger generation and stuff like that about the history of the Spanish Cobras, the Latin Kings, and the Maniac Latin Disciples. I did a documentary on all three, a video on all three. Spanish Cobras, old school Spanish Cobras gang history, old school Spanish Cobras and Latin Kings, that's another one, which is not too much on the history of the origin of their gang so much, just from what I remember from the 1970s and early 80s. And I was growing up with Latin Kings during the 1980s. And I did documentaries on all three, like I said before. So if you want to look them up, for those of you who haven't seen it, it'll be a good idea if you want to. I did pose a question when I was researching the history. The main reason why these three groups, these three particular gangs, even formed in the first place back in the 1950s with the Spanish Cobras, in the late 50s, early 60s with the Latin Kings, and the late 60s, 1966 especially, for the Maniac Latin Disciples. All three of them formed for the same particular reason: bullies and racism. They banded together in order to protect themselves, to protect each other from these white gangs. There was the Simon City Royals, the Harrison Gents, and the Gaylords. Now, I did a little bit of checking on the Gaylords, and of course, even though the name sounds funny, like why the fuck would somebody, a white gang or whatever, call the Gaylords, and then, you know, someone could crack a joke saying it's a homosexual gang or whatever like that. But Gaylords, in that particular name, gay, back, because this started before the 1950s. I think it was either in the 50s or late 40s. I'm not really sure of the exact date. But they formed, and the word gay means Great American Youth. That's the original meaning for it. Great American Youth. So that's what they call it, gay, and then the Great American Youth Lords, whatever kind of, you know, that kind of thing. So that's where the name Gaylords came from. And they started off as a club themselves, and then they were like they were basically a greaser gang. Back in the days, you know, with the greasers, how they had their hair out with the whatever, and the whole stereotype of how they looked back then in the 50s. And they became punks later on, just like with the other two gangs, the two white gangs. And it was bound to happen. And then when the Puerto Ricans and the Mexicans came into Chicago, when they came as immigrants, especially the Puerto Ricans, a lot of them resented Hispanics moving in. So these gangs would harass a lot of the Puerto Rican kids, bully them. Is a way of saying, get the fuck out of this neighborhood, you don't belong here. You know, that kind of thing. So they got tired of it after a while, because a lot of them will get beat up real bad. So they pretty much said, like, we got to do something. Now, this is the case mostly with the Spanish Cobras and the Maniac Latin Disciples. So they banded together, they formed their own clique, and with the Spanish Cobras, when they first formed in 1953, they called themselves the Crazy Snakes. That was the original name when they first formed, and they were like looking after each other, protecting their own, making sure Puerto Rican kids didn't get jumped by the white gangs and stuff like that. So it was basically protecting the block, protecting the neighborhood from bullies. And a couple of years later, because of poverty and having to struggle, their family struggling and all that, they decided to get into drug dealing because opportunity actually, or other type of illegal stuff, whether it's illegal fireworks or whatever, anything to make a buck, whatever they did. And they were getting pretty much successful at it. The Maniac Latin Disciples were no different. They got into it only not because they thought it was cool, because of the fact that they needed to survive. It was about survival. It's about trying to escape the harsh reality of poverty, in those neighborhoods. So that's how it was. And with the Latin Kings, they started off as a social club, and they were fighting for civil rights. They became more like a civil rights movement kind of thing. They helped people register to vote. They fought against racism. They had their own manifesto kind of thing, all these strict rules and regulations. And it's something that could have been very successful if it weren't for the fucking threat by the government and corrupted politicians and high-ranking police officers that knew that they were actually going to cause a lot of trouble against their corruption. So they poured drugs into the community. They say that these fucking spics fight amongst their own. You can make them into junkies, and then people will start getting addicted to it, and then later on within the years, which it did work. It did work exactly the way they thought it was going to happen, hoped to happen. And they started making a lot of money through the drug deals during the late 60s. And then it escalated into competition with other Hispanic gangs. So they became enemies. And the competition for power, because everybody wanted a piece of it, to escape poverty, to make money, and it led pretty much into war, especially during the 70s and the 80s. It really led to that. And it really got out of hand. So the evil schemes of the evildoers was pretty much, you could say, was pretty much done. They got what they wanted as a result of it, the reaction that they wanted. But the thing about it is, when most people think of gangs, they usually think of blacks and Hispanics mostly, which Hispanics, I'm not going to lie to you, is the largest. They make up for most of the street gangs, more than the Afro-Americans. Like, there's a gang here in Milwaukee called BOS when I was growing up in the 1980s. It was like when I was in 7th or 8th grade. I think it was 8th grade, or something like that. It was like in 1987, I first heard about a gang called BOS, which stands for Brothers of Struggle. And Brothers of Struggle were no different. They wanted to, they just formed together to protect their own, kind of like a similar type of thing with the Hispanic gangs, but then they fell into the same trap with the whole drug dealing thing. And the real original old school type people, they were not really all about the violence that we have right now. They're totally against that. Even one guy who who used to be a member of called the Satan Disciples, another Hispanic gang, and this was during the '60s, and he joined for the reason of protecting himself from bullies, and that's how they were at first. And then he went to Vietnam to go fight, and then when he came back, and it was during either the late '60s or early '70s or something like that, or the Satan Disciples became more of street thugs, and they were the drug dealing was not just what they were doing, but they were like breaking into people's homes, getting drunk, acting stupid, and just getting into fights for over stupid shit. And he was appalled by it. He was like, what the fuck's going on? What the fuck's wrong with these people? Wasn't what we were about when I first joined. So his disappointment and his disgust got the best of him. So he was like saying, fuck them. And I don't really blame him. That's just how it is. And again, most people don't really realize about the white gangs. They were like pretty much the original thugs and gangsters, but then most people, since a lot of people are racist, they don't want to think about the white gangs so much, because the Hispanics and the blacks are considered, the worst of the worst, and they pretty much push down a notch or two on the white gangs. And to me, that's really fucked up. That's, it should all be equal. And it really shouldn't be about race. It should be about character, their behavior. As far as judging them, they should be judged by race. And I'm wondering, a question was actually started. If they never formed in the first place for the reason of protecting themselves from bullies, would these gangs still form? Would they still exist anyway? I would have to say yeah, because of the poverty reason and also the opportunity to make money through drug dealing. I think it would have happened anyway because of that. And I shouldn't say nobody, but I would say a lot of people don't want to realize the real reason why these gangs formed in the first place as a necessity. They think they just wanted to form just to cause trouble and just be punks, which is not even the case. That's not even true as far as the origin of it. But most people don't even want to bother, especially white people that are racist don't even want to bother about why they even formed in the first place. And if someone does tell them, they'll just go through one ear and come out the other and not even give a fuck. Because they're so much focused on the here and now kind of thing. And I even go by that one philosophy: those who doesn't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, and stuff like that. And you need to understand what happened in the past to know your history, so you can create a better future for yourself. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Questions or comments, you know what to do. And to all of you, take care.